Hey guys, Julie here. Today we're in the kitchen and we're going to be making some red chili pork tamales.
This is one of my favorite meals, and although it can be a little bit of work, it's always worth it. First, we'll get started cooking the meat. I like to do this overnight in the crock pot as it can take a while. So I have all of the seasonings ready, and I'll post the quantities of the seasonings in the description below. One thing I like to do is combine all of the spices into a bowl with some oil so that they're evenly distributed. Then I'll take a whisk and mix it all up really well. After that's all mixed up and I've put my pork in the crock pot with a little bit of water, I pour my seasoning mixture over the top. We're going to take a basting brush and spread it all over the top and the sides. This gives the meat a really good flavor, and it also will be incorporated into the broth that we're going to use for the masa, and will give the masa a really nice flavor as well. Next, we'll take some sliced onions and place them over the top. I also added a red chili pepper from my garden for a nice little touch. Now it is all ready to cook and it looks amazing. We'll cook it for a few hours. The cooking time is going to depend on how large your meat is. A general rule of thumb is about 40 minutes for each pound of pork. After the meat is all cooked, it doesn't look quite as beautiful, but it smells phenomenal and it's going to taste even better. Want to let it cool down a little bit, but not for too long. It's much easier to shred when it's still really warm. So I'm just going to take out all of the meat and try to leave some of the large fatty pieces behind. I like to put the meat into a large bowl, that way I can easily shred it up. I'll just take my crock pot and set it to the side. Now we're going to shred all of this meat up. I'm just going to be using a couple of forks, but you can use your hands if you don't mind the consistency. Sometimes I'll use my hands as it can be a little bit faster, but I'm not a big fan of the greasiness. Just kind of depends on what mood I'm in. After the meat is all shredded up, we're going to set it aside before we make our red chili. We're going to strain out the broth from the crock pot. As you can see, the broth has a gorgeous color from all of the spices, and it's great to use for the masa and the red chili sauce. Now we're going to get started on our red chili sauce. I have some dried red chili pods from New Mexico. The first thing that we'll be doing is removing the stem and the seeds. I'll just pop the stem off of the top of each pod and pour out the seeds. No matter how hard I try, I still manage to get red chili seeds all over the place, but luckily they're easy to clean up. After all of the stems and the majority of the seeds have been removed, we're going to rinse all of the pods really well. Next, I'm going to take all of the rinsed off pods and place them in a pot to boil. Fill it up with water. We'll boil them until they're nice and soft, and we'll drain out the water. We're going to cut up some fresh garlic cloves. If only it were that easy. Next, we'll place our softened chili pods, garlic cloves, salt, and some water into a blender. You're going to want to blend that for a decent amount of time, and then even more after. I usually blend it for about 10 minutes until it's all nice and smooth. In a large pot, we'll add some flour and oil to make a roux. We're just going to mix it up on medium-high heat until it's a nice golden brown. I like to take a fine mesh strainer on top and pour the blended red chili in. And I just mix that around until all of the liquid has passed through and the thick parts are left. And honestly, sometimes I don't sieve the blended chili, especially if I'm just making a quick batch. My blender usually blends it nice and smooth. Boiling the sauce helps, but I do prefer the smoother texture. Stir and heat on a medium to medium-high heat until it develops a somewhat paste consistency. Then we'll add some of the water that we used for boiling the pods. You can either use the water that you used for boiling, some fresh water, or even the broth from cooking the pork. whichever you prefer. Bring that to a boil and mix it really well. Let it simmer for about 10 minutes. Then we're going to add it to the shredded pork. Now I'm just going to mix it all in, and the pork is going to absorb all of that sauce. I like to stir it up really well, making sure that all of the meat is saturated. Once that's done, we'll get started on the masa, but first we'll get the husks ready.
Okay, so you'll get the corn husks and you just gotta rinse them really well, and then we're gonna boil them. Take a pot and we're gonna put the corn husks in there and fill it up with water and put it on the stove.
We'll let the husks boil for a little bit. I prefer to rinse them and boil them as opposed to just soaking them because I found they're easier to work with that way. And then I'll get the masa mixed up. First, we're going to add our salt and our baking powder into the masa flour and stir it up really well. Then we'll take our mixing bowl and place the lard into it. We'll mix that up in our mixer until it's nice and fluffy. Now I'll just add a little bit of the masa mix into the lard, and as that's blending, we'll add some of our water. We'll add some of the broth and switch back and forth between the masa and the water, making sure everything gets fully incorporated. I like to add just a little bit of water at a time as I'm adding the masa mix because I don't want it to get too moist, and at the same time I want to make sure that it's not too dry. You'll want to mix it for about 10 minutes or until it doesn't have a grainy texture and it feels nice and smooth. You'll know it's ready when you touch it and it doesn't stick to your hands.
Alright, and now that the masa is all mixed up and the right consistency, I like to put it in a more shallow bowl. That way I can grab it in order to spread it all over the husks. And I got my meat all ready to go. So the husks have been soaked and rinsed and soaked and rinsed, and I boiled them and they're nice and soft and pliable now. Alright, we're gonna take our husk and put it down, take some masa, we'll put some meat in there, and we're just gonna fold one side over, the top down, and then fold it.
Putting it all together is pretty easy, but it just takes some time. I just lay the husk down flat. I put the masa on the bottom half of the husk, and I like to leave a little bit of space towards the bottom. You can also use a spoon or a spatula to spread it on the husk. Then I add the meat and fold it. I always start with one side inwards, and then I take the top, fold it down, and then fold the other side. And now you'll just do that about 1,000 more times. It helps if you have more people rolling them.
Okay, and now we're going to steam them once they're all wrapped up. So I have this adorable little steam pot that I got. This one's going to be perfect for if I just need to warm up a few, because I'm not making a lot. I use this giant thing. And you'll want to fill it up to where when it is boiling, it's not coming up, because you don't want the bottom of the tamales to get wet.
I'm just going to put a few of them in here with the open ends facing up.
And this little steamer has this little handle so that if I need to check to see if I need water, I can just lift it up, which I'm really excited about, because on the big one you can't do that.
We'll put it on the stove on a medium-high heat and steam them for about 15 minutes to an hour. Then we'll let them rest for about 10 to 15 minutes before putting them on a plate. In my household, that's not going to be quite enough, so let's go ahead and get started filling the big pot. Drop a penny in the bottom and fill it up to the bottom line with water. The penny will start to rattle if or when you need to add any water. Put the steam basket down over the bottom and start filling it up. As I'm filling it up, I like to lean the tamales up against the sides first and then around so they'll help hold each other up. I also don't like to pack them in there too tight because they'll take much longer to cook. We'll put the pot on the stove. After about 50 minutes to an hour, we'll turn the heat off and let them rest as we did before. My favorite part is when I get to enjoy all of that hard work and eat them. As you can see, they'll just come right off of the husks as I unroll them. I like to pour some more red chili sauce over the top. Then I'll add some shredded cheese. And I just put my whole plate in the microwave for about 30 seconds so the cheese is all melted before diving in. I'll post all the yummy details and the instructions down below. Thank you so much for watching and make sure to like and subscribe.